Let me pop that door back. Okay, folks, welcome to our second IT Specialist Professional Vitality event for the year. We missed first quarter, we got second quarter done, now we're in the third quarter, and we'll have another one in the fourth quarter. Today, I figured a good thing to do would be to give you some perspective coming from a fellow who ends up leading a lot of engagements within IBM. Literally is the fellow who stands at the front of the ship in the wind in a lot of these large-scale deployments. Deals with customers, deals with problems, deals with moving things along, major successes to make sure they happen. And so Brian Finley comes to us from Advanced Technical Skills. He hasn't been with IBM an awful long time. We first met him, Rome and I, at a Technical Leadership Exchange in 2011. And so that's about the time you came along, Brian.
That's correct.
And Brian is hired on as an executive IT specialist. So he's a band 10, and he has been leading ever since. And so Brian's going to give you a presentation on kind of who do you want to grow up to be. And you might find it rather interesting as he moves through mastery and morphology. And so he's going to give you some biographical information as he goes through his presentation, so I'll dispense with that and give you Brian Finley.
Thank you very much. Now, before we actually get into the presentation, I want to talk about Jerry for a minute. So Jerry actually was my mentor in putting together my Level 3 IT certification packet. And he gave me a lot of harassment about extensive use of commas. So, I just want you to know that commas save lives. Oh, whoops. Okay, so now how is the volume? Is that okay? Too much? Good? All right. So what we'll do today is we'll step through a quick visual bio, a little bit about me personally, career-wise. Then we'll talk about stages of career progression. Visual bio will probably take about 5-7 minutes on that. We'll then step into the stages of career progression, probably spend about a half an hour there. We'll talk about the characteristics of different stages of a career. This is oriented on an IT specialist career, but much of it could be applicable to any kind of career. And as part of that, we want to try and give you some tools to help you see into your own career and identify what stages you might be at and what stages might be coming up. We'll talk about continuing education. The somewhat humorous subtitle that Jerry had suggested was The Continuing Education of Brian Finley, and I think that's appropriate. So when we get into that, we'll talk about how do you decide what to pursue next, both in terms of skills and in terms of roles. And then we'll talk about technical leadership and a real-world example of a large-scale project that is ongoing. It's one that I'm in the middle of right now. We'll talk about some of the challenges that are involved in it and how you address such challenges from a technical leadership perspective. And then hopefully we'll get to the end and I have some bonus material, and I think this is actually really good bonus material. When Jerry first asked me to do this presentation, I thought, hey, that sounds like a really good idea. And we had an initial conversation, and the ideas just started flooding out. And as I started going through creating this presentation, I got so excited about parts of this, I almost wished that we had a whole week where we could do like an hour a day for 5 days, and we can dive in. This would be like the introductory speech, and then we could dive into some of the other subsections. the things that I think could really make a profound impact on your own careers. So, a little bit about me. My name is Brian Finley. I live in Texas. I have one wife, a 15-year-old, 3 8-year-olds. I like to play racquetball on Mondays, sometimes Thursdays, hockey on Tuesdays, and that's not actually me. But I appreciate you thinking so. I've climbed a mountain once, and if you can see it back up here, that's my buddy Mike up there, to give you some sense of the perspective. It's really disconcerting how big things are when you get up there. Or twice. This one was Mount Snuffles. These are both 14ers in Colorado. And this is actually a glacier flowing down the side of the mountain. We had to wear crampons, the big spikes on the bottom of your shoes to make it up. I am actually an artist by training and degree. These are a few of the things that we have hanging in the house right now. But my first job as a professional was at UT Southwestern Medical Center in 1992. I was doing computer graphics for a doctor doing genetic engineering research on retroviruses. And then I got hired into a second lab there to do computer graphics on Windows machines. This is back when you actually had to type Win to get the window up. And then I ended up spending about 10% of my time managing a VAX system for a clinical research group working with records from patients at Parkland Memorial Hospital. So it was somewhere in the midst of this that I had to print to the secretary's printer one day when she was gone, and so I networked the Macintoshes together. Now, that was pretty cool. And then when I was hired into the second lab, where they were doing autoimmune disease genetic engineering research, things like transgenic mice and exciting stuff, especially if you're a biologist. But they had the goal for me to end up taking over their computer network, which was a Novell NetWare network, from their lead scientist who was doing it at the time. And so I ended up with as a certified Novell engineer by the time I left UT Southwestern. While I was there, I discovered Linux, and I fell in love. That's good stuff. So in '96, I went to work for Berger & Company, which was a consulting company based out of Colorado, but they had a location in Dallas, out of the Quadrangle. And by the time I left Berger & Company, I had acquired these other certifications. Don't tell anybody outside of this room that I actually have the OS2 LAN server certification. I don't want to have to use that again. And while I was there, I helped to found Berger Technology Integrators, which was a hardware reseller branch of this consulting company. And they sold Sun Microsystems equipment and Compaq. So in '98, I left Berger & Company and went to work as an independent contractor through my wife's company, C.L. Finley Corporation. She started this company as an avenue for her to do her technical recruiting, and it made a nice way for me to establish contracts with the people I was working for. In '98, oh, and by the way, one of the people I ended up contracting back to was Berger & Company. Kind of neat. And so in '98, I was working at Primeco under a contract with Berger & Company, or through them, and I was one of 2 senior Solaris sysadmins. We had a mid-level guy and a junior guy, and we were responsible for 400 Solaris boxes all over the nation and Hawaii. Never got to go to Hawaii for that, but I did get to go to Hawaii last year for a supercomputer. Anyway, so so part of what we had to do was manage consistent deployment of images to these Solaris boxes, even though they had a lot of physical differences in the systems. And so I ended up creating SystemImager. And I know that part of what you're seeing on the screen here is cut off. I don't know if there's anything, but you're not missing anything particularly
It's
interesting.
on the e-meeting good, so.
Okay, good. And so SystemImager, when I transitioned into my next role, which was very Linux focused, I ended up modifying it to work with Linux, and it became a very, very popular tool. And these are some of the companies that have, and some still use it, including IBM. SystemImager is included as part of, as a component available through xCAT, and was one of it provides one of the capabilities that was required by platform computing to provide one of the capabilities that they state they have. So my next job was at VA Linux Systems. Now this was an exciting one. Linux was a pretty new thing, and when I went to work there, I was employee number 80. It was pre-IPO, and Red Hat had their IPO that summer. So I went to work for them in like March timeframe, and Red Hat had their IPO in the summer, and people were like, oh wow. Now all of a sudden you hear people saying Red Hat and Linux in the grocery store, and that was just unheard of before. And so by December, when VA had their IPO, people were just going nuts for it. And so we had the highest first day gains in the history of the stock market, which was crazy. And before I show you the next slide, take a note here. So it was while I was at VA Linux Systems that I got my MCSE. Kind of odd, but it turns out that I was partly there. I had done part of the work on it anyway, but by having a lot of the companies that we were selling into were using Microsoft products, and by having the credentials to say, yes, I know about the Microsoft products, and I also know about what you can do with Linux, and this is why I believe that Linux is actually a better fit for your needs. It would give more credence to what I had to say. And so you can see here, first day gains, $242 a share. That was pretty exciting, with an initial opening price of like $29 or something. But by the time I was actually able to sell any of my options, it was down here to June, and it was only $42 a share. So it was still good. It was a fun thing, but it wasn't I'm going to retire forever kind of money, unfortunately. Anyway, so much of the cause of this, downward slide had to do with Alan Greenspan getting a little bit too antsy and popping the dot-com bubble just a little bit too early, in my opinion. And so as VA was downsizing, they went through a couple of large rounds of layoffs, like 35% and 25%. And I was the manager for the pre-sale systems engineers for the western half of North America. And they said, you've got an opportunity here, you're in kind of an odd position. We'll let you stay with the professional services organization and you'll get bought by Red Hat, or you can take this nice severance package that we just gave this last crew. And I said, I'll take the severance package, and I went back to work for myself. Bald Guy Software. So, yeah, it's good stuff. And with Bald Guy Software, I had a long-term part-time contract with VA Linux Systems, again, contracting back to the company I used to work for. So the moral of the story here is don't burn your bridges. Yeah. And then that gave me the opportunity to pursue bid-based project work for other companies. And so I had contracts direct to Hewlett-Packard, to Compaq when they were separate companies, to Pro Microsystems, and some others. Now you'll notice that the years overlap here, because I had one contract with HP that was not completed until the spring of 2003, but in September of 2002, Argonne National Lab got a hold of me and said, hey, we'd like you to come up to Illinois and work for us. And so I went to work in the mathematics and computer science division there and became the lead HPC system administrator on their TeraGrid cluster. And the TeraGrid was a supercomputing system that spanned 4 different institutions in as many states, and was an exciting opportunity. By the time I left Argonne, I had found my way back into a management position, and I was the manager of application platforms and the Linux strategist for the laboratory. And so in that role, I had, my team was responsible for email infrastructure for the laboratory. Half of it was served with Zimbra on Linux-based systems, and the other half with Exchange. And the 2 systems had to be able to talk to each other. And then the other key part of what we did was we provided the platform for applications and for all of the business systems in the laboratory. So what we ended up having was what would be called a DevOps environment now. I didn't know that that's what it was called at the time. It was just, it made sense that I design it that way. And so it was highly available, hypervisors, virtual machines, internal, external, and application developers could promote their applications at will. And so in 2011, we decided that we now had 4 kids, and it would be a good thing if they could grow up knowing their aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents. And so I made the decision that it was time to move back to Dallas. And so I reached out to Egan Ford, whom I had worked with on the TeraGrid project, and said, hey, Egan, I've always thought it'd be kind of cool if we could work together. And he had just transitioned into a new role, which had opened up his old position on the ATS team. And he said, you should go talk to Jim Kerrigan, my prior manager, about that spot. So that's what I did. And so the time at IBM has been fun. It's been short because I'm about to go to work for some company called Lenovo. So, but I'm actually looking forward to this. This was a shock to me when I heard about it in January. I did not think of myself as a System X-oriented person, because HPC systems include all kinds of equipment, as we'll see when we get to the real-world example. So, okay, enough about me. Oh yeah, and as far as continuing education is concerned, this is just a snapshot of my status as of right now. Okay, stages of career progression. So the basic concept here, mastering morphology, is that as you progress through your career, you want to be able to master the skills that are necessary for the role that you're playing now, but you want to be prepared and able to morph into the skills and the role that are going to be needed next. So before we actually jump into the stages, we want to set a good foundation. So professionalism. And with professionalism, we start with loving kindness. Sounds kind of weird, but the idea is if you are approaching other people from the perspective, from a loving perspective, this is another person that is trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do what's best for their company, for their job, for themselves, and we don't know what's going on with them or why they may be angry at me today, but I still need to treat them with respect and also keep it appropriate. So here, it's appropriate that I'm wearing slacks and a long sleeve shirt, button down, all that kind of stuff. Some clients that I go to visit, if I show up like this, they'll kick me out. They'll say, you're way overdressed, you make us feel funny, you need to come in wearing jeans and a golf shirt or a t-shirt. And so I'll do that. If the place that you're going to visit always wears coats, dress appropriately. So just keep it appropriate. Integrity. From a professionalism perspective, as a good foundation, the people that they have found have the greatest success in business, as world leaders, as in terms of growing wealth from a financial perspective, are the ones that have the highest levels of integrity. So don't fudge on that one. Don't fudge on business ethics. So you'll often find yourselves in situations that seem vague or ambiguous. If you can't come to resolution with it and have clarity on it yourself, seek guidance from others, but don't fudge on that one. And as far as work ethic, this is always good, but work hard, have fun, work diligently, not just hard, but make sure that you're doing what you need to do a good job, because you can work hard and do a bad job, right? So work hard, do a good job, and take joy in what you do. Now, one last thing before we step into the stages is things that I want you guys to look for. And this is where this will get interactive, okay? So for each of the stages of career progression, we'll go through some scenarios. And as we talk through these examples, we're going to evaluate, for this scenario and for this role, what are the skills that are needed? What proportion of the skills needed are technical versus business skills or leadership skills? And also, we have this concept of organizational maturity. So when you're a newborn baby, you are entirely dependent on your parents. As you grow and mature, you get to a point, you move out, you're off in college, maybe you've got your own job, you're supporting yourself, you're now independent, okay? But, and when you're independent, you can do a lot of great things, but there are some things that you can't do. You can't build the Great Wall of China all by yourself. So the highest level of organizational maturity is interdependence, where you have to work with other people and through other people to accomplish goals. Again, sorry that's cut off there. Now, so some examples of things that you might see in early career is you've got what I would call the assist. You go from assisting to doing to teaching. And this is all within early career. So an example statement that represents assisting. Can you help me install the OS on these PCs? And so what do we see here in terms of the business versus leadership versus tech? So is there any business knowledge that you have to have in order to assist in installing the OS on these PCs? Say no.
No.
All right, okay. Is there any leadership skill that you have to install the OS on these PCs? No. Say no, say no. All right, okay. But you may have to have some technical. So all of the skill that you need is technical, and you may even be fed much of that technical that you need. So at this point, if we look at the pie chart, it's almost completely tech. So in terms of the continuum, and I'm going to draw the continuum once, and we'll continue to use it, no pun intended, all throughout. Okay, so we have dependence, independence, and then we have interdependence. Okay. So if you're the one that's being asked to assist, how great is your ability to do this activity independently? Well, we're assuming that the reason that you were asked to assist instead of to go and do it yourself is because you're not prepared for that. So this is an example of where you're very dependent, okay? I'm going to ask you guys to help me more with the next one. This one is an example. So at this point, we're very dependent. So then if we look at the do, can you install the OS on these PCs for me? Now, the appropriate natural response to that is, which OS? Should that be Linux or FreeBSD or DB? Anyway. So, by the way, just a pet peeve of mine that Windows has co-opted the term PCs in an attempt to make it mean Windows running PC. So, can you install the OS on these PCs for me? So what is the expected capability of you if you're able to accomplish that task? Is it still mostly technical? Yeah, I see heads nodding. That's good. Good. Okay. Is there yet any business that's really involved here? No. And there's not. You might have a smidgen of leadership in there because you have to be willing to go out and interact with the customer or whoever the PCs belong to make it happen. So maybe you've got a sliver of leadership in there. But now on the continuum, where does that fall?
You're independent.
So you're moving closer towards the independent spectrum. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw it one step closer. You'll see that this is a pretty blatantly obvious progression that we'll be going through. So many of the answers will be easy. And then teach. So if we move on to teach, can you show the new guy how to install the OS on these PCs? Okay. So how does that change on the pie chart?
It's more leadership.
More leadership. Okay. So I forget what color leadership was up there, but we'll say this is lead. And how about business? Does it require any business? Could you do that without having any business knowledge? Yes. Yeah. So we're still zero business knowledge over here. And that's okay. This is all appropriate for this stage. Okay? But in terms of dependence moving towards independence, is it further along the scale?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So you're moving further along the scale towards independence. And you might even be just barely touching up on the edge of interdependence, because if all you're doing is teaching the guy, then no. But if you're teaching him and then relying on him helping you, then maybe yes. All right. So, mid-career. So, mid-career is marked by having achieved independence, and you're likely at a point where you're struggling with interdependence. And we'll get into more of what that means here in a minute, the struggling with interdependence part. But this is also the point at which contemplations of the corporate ladder might start to happen. What does the corporate ladder really mean? How do I do it? Do I even really want to do it? And those are all good questions. But in terms of scenarios, what does this practically look like? So here's an example. The customer says to you, I need a machine with 1 terabyte of memory, and our response is, okay, we can do that, right? So in terms of the pie chart, would you say it's still primarily a technical thing? Yes. Okay, good. And would you say that leadership has increased a little bit? Yes. Okay, I would agree, because now we are acting as the primary customer-facing person for this particular effort. Okay. So now so we've got the scenario. Customer says, I need a machine with 1 terabyte of memory. Our response is, okay, we can do that. It's still primarily a technical response. There's a little bit more leadership in it than even before, because we're that primary person, but we still haven't introduced any business thinking. So in terms of the continuum, this should be an easy one. Where should I draw the circle?
You're independent.
That's exactly right in the middle. Okay, excellent. So now, so an alternate response to that same customer question might be, okay, we can do that. And what is your goal for this machine? Now we're starting to try and find out what is the actual problem you're trying to solve. Many customers assume that they already know the answer, but a lot of times we may have a better one. So we say, what is the goal? And the customer says, well, we've got a performance problem on our database server. Well, memory may be the right solution. Memory may not be the right solution. But at this point, by simply asking the question, we've ventured more into the leadership role. We've entered into a consultative discussion. The consultative discussion means that we're leading the customer through a thought process. By leading them through that thought process, well, we're leading them, right? And of course, the goal is to help them to come to a decision that even better meets their needs, or to confirm their original assumptions. So we've got another potential alternate response. I understand the interest in more memory to address the performance problem, but there might be a more effective approach. What's no wrong answers here. What's an example of, you got a customer that has said this, what might be a different approach? Anybody? Bueller?
Tuning?
Database tuning. Sure. Anything else? You there in the white shirt. Yes. Okay. That's fine. No worries. So, but the point is that there may be other ways of addressing this. So, what we're beginning to do is we still have the technical foundation, which is necessary to be in that conversation at all. But now we're adding a little bit more leadership. We're playing that consultative role. But now we're starting to introduce something for the first time, something we haven't seen yet in this career progression, and that's some business aspect. And the business aspect of this is by considering alternate approaches. Maybe it's, well, we have a lot of customers that find that in your situation, instead of going with a single machine with 1 terabyte of memory, using 3 machines with a smaller amount of memory, it ends up being less expensive overall, and they're able to achieve some higher availability in the service that they provide. Wow. Now you've introduced some real business value to what was initially just a technical issue. Business value that actually helps the customer to be successful. Does that make sense? Okay. So as we're going through this, I want you guys to also be thinking about interactions that you have had with your manager, with your peers, with your customers, and think about how the activities that you've done might play into these different roles. So what is this climbing the ladder thing? So it's a very common phrase, I'm sure we've all heard it, but it was baffling to me in terms of trying to find a solid analogy that accurately matched those words and what I saw in corporate culture. and I finally got it. And that was, you can't grab the next rung until you let go of the one below. And it's a fairly profound thought. But it's something that applies whether you're a CEO or a team lead. So as you are reaching up, as you climb higher and higher, roles are less and less well defined. So you look at the CEO of a company. Well, what is he doing? Oh, he's setting the direction for the company. Well, who told him to set that direction? Well, nobody told him. Now, if he's a good CEO, he's got a board of advisors. A wise king has many advisors. But still, it's not a very well-defined role. And as you move from individual contributor to team lead, even at that level, there's a lot of flexibility in how you choose to conduct yourself, how you choose to interact with other people. It becomes harder and harder, even if it was desired to make it a very well-defined role, it becomes harder and harder to define it. And it becomes more and more up to you. So the rung below, if the rung below represents what you are already good at, it's what you have already mastered. And the rung above is the next level of opportunity that you're reaching for, but you haven't mastered it yet. But at some point, you can reach it maybe one rung, maybe two. I got long arms, I can get three maybe. But at some point, I'm going to have to let go of that bottom rung before I can get up to the next one. And that can be a really scary thing. And this is something that I see people struggle with, and I've struggled with myself at all levels. And you'll see some people that go into executive management and they just seem fit for it. And it just works out great for them, and they love it, and they do all kinds of wonderful things. Like, man, I never would have thought of that. How did he end up getting so many things done? But then you might look at somebody else and say, wow, they moved into a similar role, and yet they seem to be struggling with it. And why is that? And in the cases that I've had good visibility into, it seems to be that a lot of times it's having a hard time letting go of that lower rung. This is especially true in IT. So if you have a team of developers, who do you want to lead the group of developers? Well, the natural conclusion is you take your best developer and you make them the team lead, because that's the person who knows what they all should be doing. But the problem is the skill that's required on that next rung up has a lot more focus on things that are not the actual development. And so it is a tricky challenge. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay. So, and by the way, you don't have to choose to grab that next rung. It's okay if you decide that I don't want to. For me, I like where I am, and I just want to continue to get better at doing what I'm doing. That's an okay thing too. And we'll talk when we get into this next section here, continuing education. We'll talk more about how to figure that out for yourself. So looking at a leadership career. So I didn't want to say, you got early career, mid-career. I didn't want to say end career, terminal career, maybe high, okay, leadership career. So that's really what we're seeing as a progression towards interdependence. Interdependence is one of the characteristics that is a mark of a role in leadership, in that you are focused on accomplishing goals that go beyond what you can do on your own. You can't build the Great Wall of China on your own. So, leadership versus management. Absolutely. Just like Mrs. Incredible. You need to be more flexible.
That's right.
Okay. So, leadership versus management. Management is not necessarily leadership. It can be part of it, but management can simply be assigning tasks, figuring out, roles and responsibilities and administrivia and things like that. Whereas leadership is inspiring, encouraging, and engaging others to participate across all aspects of the cause, whatever it is, so that the most effective leaders are the ones where the productivity that they bring about is not directly tied to the hours in the day that they put in. Otherwise, you become a bottleneck. So, one scenario here is, hey, Board of Advisors, we need to build this wall, and I need help from each of your expert teams. Okay? Let's sit around, give me advice. And there's a lot packed into the sentence. The first one is, this leader has a board of advisors. Okay? He's not making, so you can have a dictator who is not a leader. Okay? So he's not, or she is not making decisions without the interaction with the others. They all need to be engaged, all need to be participating, and they all need to get on fire for the cause, whatever it is, so that they can then translate that to their teams. So he's got the board of advisors. We have this project. It's a big project. We can do it, and you are all important. And your teams are important. And I recognize that they have expertise. So all of this message comes from the leader. It goes to the board of advisors, but then when the board of advisors, when those people are then, in this case, maybe the board of advisors is managers over groups of, maybe there's the networking group and the server group and, these different teams of people with expertise. When those managers go back to talk to their teams, they're going to say these same words, and then the team members are going to know, oh, the leader recognizes my value in this and my expertise. So it becomes the skill set becomes much more social, much more of an interpersonal thing, and much less of a technical thing. But keeping all of the business aspects in balance as well. Does that make sense? So, so this was the last slide that I created about 5 minutes before 11:30, and so I can provide a couple of additional scenarios here, but I'm thinking that you guys may find more interest in moving on to the next section. So if you have more questions about this part, we'll come up and see me afterwards. So, continuing education. Know yourself. Now this is kind of a cool picture, and you probably can't see it here, but this picture is actually called I See Me. And for those of you who are watching the presentation online, or for those of you that get a copy of it afterward, you'll see there's actually, you can see her reflection in her pupil. So it's kind of cool. But it's easier said than done. So what are the things that give you joy? Think of one right now. Do more of that. Yeah? Find something in the work that you do that gives you joy, and find a way to do more of that kind of work. If you like the work you do, you're more likely to be interested in investing the effort into it to become really good at it. And you're more likely to be successful at it. Doing what is hard and painful for you is not necessarily a recipe for career success. So one of my weaknesses, now you need to acknowledge your weaknesses, but you don't necessarily, you don't always have to dwell on them. So one of mine is, I have a strength in strategy and in handling emergent situations and things like that. I have a weakness in doing the same thing on a regular basis, consistently on a regular schedule. So I recognize that, and so I try to build systems into my life to help me in those ways. Or if I'm working on a project, and we'll talk about this in a minute with Texas A&M, I have a project manager in place who is good at those things, and so he takes on those parts of the responsibility. And it works out really nicely. So know your own behavioral tendencies. And knowing those, it doesn't predict where you have to go with your career, but it can help you in getting there. This disc profile thing will help you. It's not a personality test. It's a self-assessment of your behavior, and what results is a behavioral profile. And the fascinating thing about behavior is that if you can recognize how others tend to behave, and you know how you tend to behave, then you can communicate more effectively with other people. And the thing is that when you are behaving similarly to the person you're trying to communicate with, they understand you better. And this is even true when, one of the things about this is that the way that you tend to behave is not the way you have to behave. So you can behave differently if you think about it in advance. So some people have a tendency to, they're not quite comfortable looking you right in the eyes. And so they'll be looking down much of the time. They'll keep their hands will stay in. You've got a little box right here, right? They'll keep their hands inside that box, and it'll never put. Oh, whoops, sorry, come back. It'll never go out like that. And so, and their voices, maybe they're softer spoken. I tend to be like this. My arms are all over the place. I'm staring you right in the eyes, and if I walk up to somebody who is doing the, I can observe the behavior, the specific behavior if they're looking down, they're keeping their hands inside the box, things like that. If I go up to them and I'm like this and I'm staring them straight in the face and I'm shouting at them, it's not going to make for a good conversation. I can change my behavior in advance, and I can choose to, I can still look in their eyes, but then I look away quickly, and I'm not mimicking them, but I'm exhibiting the same behavioral communication style that they do. And so we naturally communicate better. Because 85% of what we understand from someone communicating with us is actually by their body language. Okay. So, mastery in morphology. If it's worth doing, learn how to do it well. And it begins right after morphology. When does morphology start? Right after mastery, right? Well, it's a cycle thing. So, in terms of mastery, I think you guys already know how to do this, but the one thing I'd say is don't just learn what you need to do, learn why, make sure that you understand the methodology and the technology. But then morphology is, as you are doing the thing that is mastery in your current role, look around. Take a look at the other opportunities that are around you. This is something that I've done all throughout my career. I found out very early on that I liked computers. All kinds of things that had to do with computers. I like computer networking, I like databases, I like Linux, Windows, Mac OS, AIX, well, maybe not AIX, but lots of things. And so as I progressed in my career, I was constantly looking around, and I still am, and saying, what are the skills that are most in demand right now? What do I see people being hired to go and do? And sometimes, you'd see a flash in the pan kind of opportunity. Like maybe there's some new hot database product that would come out, and you'd see people being hired to go do that, and they get paid a lot of money. But I would ask myself, I could go do that, but how does that set me up for my next morphology? Okay? So maybe I would make more money in the short term, and presumably I would enjoy it because I like doing all kinds of things that have to do with computers. But how does that set me up for my next transition? And so but I have been able to make a lot of transitions that are tangential. So I'm doing system administration, and then there's a need to do some networking, but there isn't a qualified network guy there. So I develop the skill I need to be able to handle the networking. I'm doing the networking, and we're connecting a database, but we don't have people who can talk from this database to that database, and so I find a way to develop the skill to have the two databases talk together. Things like that. So look around as you're doing your current role. Do this now. Do this today. Do this perpetually. And how can you position yourself to move into such a role or to develop that skill? And again, my focus was always on, I don't think I completed the whole thought earlier about the flash in the pan kind of opportunity. My focus has always been on trying to identify the next skill and the next role that would be sustainable, that would continue to be something I could build upon after that point. So let's jump into a real-world example. Texas A&M University, they bought some stuff from us. I'm going to switch over to that now. And let's see. Okay. So I'm going to go through this quickly like the visual bio. We had 3 different data centers across 2 different states. We had some System X equipment. We had some System P equipment. We had a Blue Gene system. We have 4 petabytes of GSS storage in Texas, 2 petabytes up in Rochester, Minnesota, connected to the Blue Gene system. We have another shared university research grant system that includes a petabyte of storage, 10 terabytes of flash storage, and a bunch of tape for a tiered file system for archival purposes. We have Ethernet at one of the data centers, Ethernet at the other data center, 80 gigabytes going between them. We've got an Internet 2 connection between the Blue Gene system up in Rochester coming down to the others. We've got InfiniBand for the System X equipment. This is the data center floor plan for one data center in Texas. There's the other one. This is what it looks like when you're accessing the file systems from the perspective of the main cluster, from the perspective of one of the P7 is in 2 different segments. Part of it is a big data implementation. The other part is just P7 compute nodes. We've got GPU nodes and Intel Phi accelerators on some of the compute nodes. We've got 1 terabyte memory nodes, 2 terabyte memory nodes. And that's the view from the Blue Gene system, because the GPFS file system up at the Blue Gene and the GPFS file system down in Texas are going to be using AFM, active file management, to access each other transparently with local caching. And so that's a lot of stuff, right? That is a wall. Okay? It's a wall. It's more than one person can reasonably do. certainly within, even if you had all of the skill sets to do all of those things, from a technical perspective, it's more than is reasonable for one person to do simply based on the amount of effort. So when I was first told, or first asked, if I would help out with this effort, I said yes. And the first thing I did was I identified how we were going to structure the project. I said, Steve Coladangelo, you do a great job with project management. I would like you to play the role of project manager here. And then, as the top level project manager. And then I identified a technical project manager for each of the technologies. So there's a System X technical PM, a System P technical PM, a Blue Gene technical PM, a SIR grant technical PM, and a platform services technical PM for that part of the implementation. And I also took on two of the roles. So I took on the role of technical PM for the GPFS storage as well as the System X. But even if I wanted to, I couldn't do all of it. So then, after breaking out the responsibilities, it's important that we make it, the technical PM roles are not just important from a technical leadership perspective. They're not just important from the perspective of breaking up the tasks. It's important so that everybody knows what their role is. How do they participate? How are they expected to contribute to the overall success? And then the members on their team know, I am working on this piece. I am not expected to work on this other piece. I can set that aside. I can focus on this. And so, in addition to being important for separation of effort based on technical skill, it's important for separation of focus. So each of the groups can spend more time focusing on what's important to them.